Hi there. How's everyone's day going so far? Since this is recorded, I'm gonna assume that you said everything is great and the conference is a really good time, because I'm sure it is. So, welcome to Helping an Ecosystem Fade Away. I promise we're not gonna try and make this too much of a downer, even though the title kinda sounds like one. So, my name is Samuel Giddins. I'm currently a security engineer working at Ruby Central, focusing on the security of rubygems.org and the Ruby packaging ecosystem as a whole. But today, I'm talking as Samuel Giddins, the CocoaPods core team member, former project lead, shipper of CocoaPods 1.0, longtime CocoaPods maintainer. As you can probably surmise, we're going to be talking about CocoaPods today. As you can also maybe surmise, this is a conference built for someone like me who has spent a lot of time working on way too many package managers. We'll get to that. So, you might be wondering, what is this CocoaPods thing? Are they tasty? Can I eat them? Well, let me just quote from our handy dandy website. CocoaPods is a dependency manager for Swift and Objective-C Cocoa projects. Has a whole bunch of libraries and is used in a ton of apps. CocoaPods can help you scale your projects elegantly. Not bad marketing for an open source project's website, right? So, maybe more helpfully, CocoaPods has been the unofficial Apple development platform package ecosystem. Whew, that is a real mouthful. I should leave marketing stuff to other people, I guess. And it dates back to before Apple shipped their own package manager, which means we're talking about 2011. CocoaPods burst onto the scene over a decade ago, right when mobile development was all the rage and Apple didn't supply any sort of dependency or package management for its ecosystems. And this is probably going to be a familiar story for many of you here today. It's how it always starts. There's an upstart group of open source engineers who want to change the world. And by change the world, I mean reuse code while building multiple client project applications. And so they do what anyone would do in that situation, and they start from scratch. They build a package manager. They onboard popular libraries, and people start adopting it, and it becomes popular. Okay, well, maybe that doesn't always happen, but if you're talking about a package manager at a conference, it probably has become popular. And, the next bullet point didn't fit on the slide, and that's fitting because the next step, of course, should have been profit. Okay, but what happens next? We're talking about a package manager. So certainly there's no profiting happening. Insert nervous chuckle. Profit would be great. But really, what happens next here in our story? Well, another package manager joins the scene. It's called Carthage. It sort of has a different philosophy. It doesn't have a central package registry. It doesn't try to have its own specification format for defining packages. Some people like it. Doesn't get as popular as CocoaPods, but there's an alternative. And then Apple ships their own package manager. It's called, believe it or not, the Swift package manager, used for Swift programming language projects. And it came out when Swift had its first open source release and has gotten, continued investment from Apple and their large group of engineers ever since. And finally, we end up shipping version 1.0 of CocoaPods. Give myself a pat on the back for that. Well done, Sam. We shipped version 1.0 of CocoaPods in May of 2016 after like a 6-month-long beta period. It was super exciting. I gave a really long talk about the road to CocoaPods 1.0. There's a transcript of that talk on my blog. You don't need to feel the need to read it. I cried at the end. I said, I'm kind of burned out on this now. But it was a monumental achievement. We said, okay, everything we've done is stable. We're not going to make breaking changes. The ecosystem's really matured. And for a while, that was true. CocoaPods adoption continued to increase amongst, really large iOS applications. Many of the top apps in the App Store used CocoaPods. I think that's pretty safe to say. And also the size and importance of large iOS apps continued to increase. This is the mid-2010s. VC funding was really excited about any shiny mobile application. I don't know why. We all kind of lost our minds for a bit. And despite that, CocoaPods remained a small open source project with a small number of maintainers. It's kind of the standard story for an open source package manager. And, okay, enter from stage right, Buck and Basil. Forgive the little detour, but we're around, 2018, give or take 18 to 20 months. So quickly, Buck is a build system developed by Facebook. Basil is a build system that was open sourced by Google. Both are designed to be these fast, reproducible, super scalable build systems based on the same, heritage, Google's internal Blaze build system. And I sort of jokingly say that they're the build systems of choice for companies that employ not just build engineering teams, but build engineering organizations. And so against this backdrop, CocoaPods is kind of being squeezed on both sides. On the one hand, there's the Swift package manager. It's slowly gaining necessary features in the years after its initial release. And it's starting to form a viable alternative for the small apps and open source libraries that CocoaPods was originally designed for. And on the other hand, there's Buck and Basil, which are being adopted by the largest iOS teams in the world. And they're designed to scale to the biggest code bases. And they do so by completely cutting out the substrate that CocoaPods as the package manager uses to communicate with the build system, which are Xcode's project files. And the teams that are adopting Buck and Basil, they're pouring huge amounts of effort into those migrations, and they're focusing their tooling development on stuff that's working in that ecosystem and not in the CocoaPods ecosystem. And, that kind of feels super disheartening at the time. Why work on a package manager when the replacements are already here? Who's going to fund work and be excited about it? Personally, I could say, who's going to respond to the Slack messages saying the package index website is down, or the email from a security researcher reporting a CVE, or the GitHub issue about the new version of Xcode breaking something? Someone's got to do that, but, it doesn't feel so exciting anymore to say, I'm a maintainer of CocoaPods. And while the shift is happening, while, these replacements are here, both on the small side and the big side, many users don't know that there's anything going on. It's not a shift that everyone's going to see and feel happening. The important thing to remember that I keep on trying to remind myself is that something like 90% of CocoaPods users just don't care about this evolution. If they're working on shipping an app that uses CocoaPods, great. And if they're not, they're probably not thinking about package managers because, let's be honest, that's something that only attendees at a package management conference would do 24/7. No, couldn't be me. But there's another party involved here. CocoaPods isn't just a package manager. It's not just a command line tool. Like pretty much every other package manager, it also represents an ecosystem. And that ecosystem is primarily made up of the libraries that are published to it. These libraries, they're fitting in with the theme, they're called pods. And no one would have used CocoaPods if there weren't a bunch of open source pods that you could just use. That was the selling point, saying, start using this package manager and you can use other people's packages for free. What's not to like? But the ecosystem also provides value outside of what we would strictly call package management. And I guess that strict package management would be like downloading and building source code. The ecosystem has search and discovery of libraries. Someone can type in, Twitter and get a Twitter API client, and maybe that wouldn't work out super well for them in 2023. They would go to find documentation on popular libraries, like API documentation or reference guides for them. They'd count on having interoperable dependencies. I know there's some talks about dependency resolution and all that, but it's something that we can't really take for granted that an ecosystem has. You can use A and B, they'll coexist together. Also, there's a community. People knew what CocoaPods was, and there's a plugin ecosystem, and people built CocoaPods plugins that would do useful things. And, being a package manager, it would also be a starting point for flame wars for people who have opinions. Because really nothing brings out opinions in opinionated people like talking about package managers and the things that they don't like about other people's package managers. And again, there's another party involved. It's the package authors. And having all those nice things, having that community depends on developers continuing to push libraries to CocoaPods, to update those libraries, to update the manifest for those libraries, supporting new versions of iOS and macOS and watchOS and tvOS and visionOS and some other OS, whatever Apple announces next year, and so on. So, all that being said, we, the CocoaPods core team, we decide to not really do anything drastic. CocoaPods still worked. It was still used. And at the same time, no one on the team was feeling super motivated to spend a bunch of time working on it anymore. And unless they were using it at work, and well, fewer people were using it at work, weren't they? And so we sort of come to the conclusion part of this talk. It's been I hope, interesting history lesson so far. But what do you do about it if you're on the team maintaining the package manager and the entire ecosystem? And you can see that its days are maybe a bit limited. I thought that this was a really funny way to put it. Forgive the sort of macabre humor, but what does palliative care look like for a packaging ecosystem? What does it look like to help take it through the end of its life? Funny enough, as I was preparing these slides, the following interaction actually came up in the CocoaPod Slack. And it's not a super uncommon one with a project that's limping along. Someone says, hi there. We need a new release to ship this fix, which is making CocoaPods fail on a lot of configurations. Anyone available to do it? And this is a former core team member who came into the Slack channel to say this. And then we have a response from another former core team member saying, well, realistically, only Dimitris can make deploys nowadays. So it might be a good chance to try and get someone else to also make deploys. The current core team member says, I've done one or two, including once with Dimitris in person. I could give it a shot this time around. And then me, who I'm not always the most helpful. I try to be, and I sometimes fail. I jumped in and I said, well, I've done a bunch of releases, and I'm thinking to myself, yeah, I've probably done in the hundreds of releases, but it's been a real long time. And the subtext here is I'd kind of like to keep it a long time. But all the maintainers have mostly moved on to doing other things. And because it's no longer the shiny new project, no new maintainers have stepped up to take their place. And so we're left with a small group of people who are still around, but don't have the time or the energy or the motivation, really, to do the hard work. And, if you've been paying attention and you're sensing a theme here, I hope that it's this. Eventually, keeping the ecosystem running stops being rewarding. Working on a completely open source, non-corporate backed open source package manager, we're in it for the good fuzzy feelings. That's the only sort of rewards that are available to us. And so once we catch on and move on to doing more rewarding things, and time marches on, and I'll let you think of 1,000 other appropriate cliched metaphors for this. This is the way that the ecosystem eventually ends. Not with a bang, but with a whimper. There's no big announcement of it's over, but there's also fewer announcements about everything, really. Things end slowly. There's a self-reinforcing cycle that starts as soon as new projects move on to the new thing. New engineers are now not being introduced to the pod command line tool, and new libraries being built don't add pod spec files to support installing via CocoaPods by default. Someone's going to spend their next hack week pulling together a productivity tool, and it's going to be based on a new build system. And now there's just one more cool thing that you realize CocoaPods can't do. And eventually, these things start snowballing and happen a little bit faster. Apple adds support for Swift macros into the Swift package manager, and that support just never makes its way into CocoaPods. And the new build systems keep gathering new features and get more eyes on them and just generally get better. And big companies spend money moving away from CocoaPods and onto Bazel. And the patches that would just trickle in from those companies they stop. And when folks would file an issue on CocoaPods, they're not doing that anymore, because you run into the issue and decide it's as good an excuse as any to give Swift PM a try, and you find out that it now does everything you need it to do, and you adopt it and move on. And all the while, legacy apps keep shipping and they keep using CocoaPods, and all the old stuff, it still works until it doesn't anymore. And, I have to say that we're still here. We're just doing less. We're never planning on making a conscious decision to just shut everything off and walk away. That would be, pretty terrible stewardship on our part. We're just still here doing less. That being said, some of the fun stuff is gone. Software naturally atrophies over time. And those additional ecosystem features that I mentioned earlier, like search and documentation and compatibility, they're no different. Back in the day, we spent a ton of time maintaining CocoaDocs, an automated documentation builder. There was the CocoaPods stats microservice that would say how many different applications were using each library. We had this really cool bespoke search engine that was based on a contributor's PhD thesis, and so on. And one by one, they each stopped working, and we reached the point where we decided to retire those pieces rather than trying to resurrect them. There once was a CocoaPods Mac app. It was really cool. It was great engineering. It bundled in Ruby and Git and Mercurial and all of the CocoaPods Ruby language dependencies, and had a pod file text editor built in. You could just download it and click a button and all your dependencies would be installed without needing to set up your machine. It was a real technical achievement. And a few years after we shipped that, someone came into Slack and said, what's everyone's thoughts on it? Should we archive the repo? Do we actively maintain the app? And the answer sort of ended up being, well, we tried, but it's getting outdated, and maybe we shouldn't be pushing users to install something with end-of-life Ruby versions and Git versions installed into it. And so that repo is now archived. That being said, CocoaPods is still getting new releases, and it still allows pushing libraries. And most of us are still hanging out in the CocoaPods Slack, although it is a lot quieter these days. I think in general, stuff will stick around until there's a reason for it to go away. Those reasons could include things like legal threats or money, or just stuff breaking, platforms being deprecated, and us not wanting to do the work to move to whatever came next. To that I say, will the last package author please turn the lights off on their way out? So now I invite you to close your eyes and pretend a little bit. Skip forward 10 years, and nope, 10 years from now is not 2023. The year is 2033. I've cycled between wearing a beard and being clean-shaven at least half a dozen more times. I haven't written an iOS app in 15 years. GitHub is a fun thing we read via the Wayback Machine. There's no version of Ruby less than 5 that will run on my 1024 core laptop. I head to a cool conference, and between sessions, someone walks up to me. Hey, you're Samuel Giddins, right? I remember you from CocoaPods way back when. Thanks so much for working on it. It was a lifesaver for us back in the day. Can I buy you a beer to say thanks? Everyone will have forgotten about the bugs they filed and long-standing complaints and specific features they used. And just remember that the ecosystem was there when they needed it, had a good run, it was in the right place at the right time. And eventually, everything comes to an end. And I suppose that's the reward that we were in it for the first place. And that'll have to do. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. We actually have Sam online, so we're going to throw him up on the screen to take, I guess, 1 or 2 questions because we happen to have him online. There's a 30-minute break after this, so I think we can go a little into it. All right. Yeah.
Hello. This was, I think, more at the beginning of the talk, and lots of things were after that, honestly. So I guess my question, I guess, was regarding the Swift package manager when it was introduced. There's lots of reasons why Apple would want to do that. I want to know, do you have any thoughts on what kind of the trade-off was for Apple when they kind of? And again, I know this is something that's a reasonable thing to do, but I want to know, I guess, what do you think about kind of their interest there, and especially kind of their goals with that? And I'm not asking you to be super political or whatever. I'm just interested in your analysis here because I'm not super familiar with the ecosystem.
Hold on, you're not on audio yet.
Tricky.
Okay, I think we got you on now.
Configuring audio, hard. Sorry about that. So I think Apple's goal there really was to deliver a language that was not just locked to their ecosystems. They'd just gone through, at the time, maybe 15 years of having a language that basically was only used on Apple platforms in Objective-C. And one of the ways to help their new language become sort of mainstream was to ship a package manager that made it feasible to build server-side apps from day one. So that would be my best guess.
Right. Any other questions? Okay, let's thank Sam. Thanks for a great talk.